Sometimes the person who changes your entire life doesn't even know they're doing it. They just walk into a room and show you what authentic living looks like. Jake had been working at the same office for almost 4 years now. Every single day felt exactly the same. Wake up at 7, grab coffee from the shop downstairs, sit at his desk by 9, and spend the next 8 hours staring at his computer screen. His life had become so predictable that he could probably do it all with his eyes closed. That Tuesday morning started just like any other. He walked into the office building, said good morning to the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper, and took the elevator to the 7th floor. The familiar smell of coffee and printer ink filled the air. Nothing unusual, nothing exciting. Just another ordinary day in his ordinary life. Jake worked for a marketing company that helped other businesses sell their products. It wasn't the most thrilling job in the world, but it paid the bills. His desk was right next to the big conference room where all the important meetings happened. Most of the time he could hear the boring conversations through the thin walls. Budgets, sales numbers, target audiences, the same topics over and over again. Around 10:30, his boss called him into one of those meetings. Something about reviewing the quarterly reports and discussing new strategies. Jake grabbed his notepad and pen, not because he had anything important to write down, but because it made him look like he was paying attention. These meetings were usually just an excuse for the higher-ups to hear themselves talk. The conference room was already full when he walked in. About 12 people sitting around the big wooden table, most of them looking as bored as he felt. Jake found an empty chair near the back and settled in for what he expected would be another hour of his life he'd never get back. The presentation had been going on for about 20 minutes. Charts and graphs filled the projector screen while someone from the sales department talked about market trends and customer behavior. Jake found himself drawing little circles and squares on his notepad, trying to stay awake. His mind started wandering to what he might have for lunch later. Then the conference room door opened. It wasn't a dramatic entrance or anything like that. No one burst through the door or made a big scene. The handle just turned quietly, and someone stepped inside. Jake barely glanced up at first. People were always coming and going during these meetings. Late arrivals were nothing new. But something made him look again. A woman had just walked in, and she was apologizing softly to the presenter for being late. She moved with this quiet confidence that immediately caught his attention. Not in a show-off way, but like someone who was completely comfortable being herself. She wasn't rushing or looking embarrassed about being late. She just calmly found an empty chair across the table from Jake and sat down. Jake watched as she pulled out a worn leather bag and set it beside her chair. Everything about her movements seemed so natural and unforced. She wasn't trying to make an impression on anyone or draw attention to herself. She was just there, present in the moment, completely at ease. She had this interesting way of settling into her chair, like she belonged there, even though Jake had never seen her before. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a navy blue blazer that looked professional but not stuffy. What really struck him wasn't her appearance, though. It was something else entirely. There was this quality about her that Jake couldn't quite put his finger on. She seemed so genuine, so real, in a room full of people who all felt like they were playing roles. Everyone else was either trying too hard to look important or clearly wishing they were somewhere else. But this woman just seemed to be herself, without any pretense or act. Jake realized he had completely stopped paying attention to the presentation. His pen had stopped moving across the notepad, and those little circles and squares were forgotten. He found himself watching this woman as she pulled out a simple notebook and opened it to a fresh page. Even the way she held her pen seemed thoughtful and deliberate. The presenter continued talking about customer demographics and market research, but Jake's focus had shifted entirely. He started noticing small details about this new person in the room. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, how she seemed to be actually absorbing what was being said instead of just waiting for her turn to speak like everyone else. She hadn't said a single word yet, but somehow her presence had changed the entire feel of the room for Jake. It was like someone had opened a window in a stuffy space. The same boring meeting that had been putting him to sleep just minutes before now felt different. More alive somehow. Jake tried to focus back on the presentation, but his eyes kept drifting across the table. This woman was taking notes, but not in the frantic way most people did during meetings. Her writing looked calm and considered, like she was actually thinking about what she was hearing instead of just copying down everything word for word. Who was she? Jake had been working at this company long enough to know almost everyone, at least by sight. But he had definitely never seen her before. Was she a new employee? A consultant brought in for this project? Someone from another department he had somehow missed meeting? The questions started piling up in his mind, but what really intrigued him wasn't just her identity. It was this sense that she saw the world differently somehow, even sitting quietly. In a conference room, not speaking, she seemed to bring a different energy to the space, like she was really present, really engaged with what was happening around her, in a way that felt rare and refreshing. Jake glanced around the room at his colleagues. Most were checking their phones under the table, doodling aimlessly or staring out the window. The usual meeting behavior he was guilty of himself just minutes ago. But this woman was different. She was actually there, genuinely listening and thinking about what she was hearing. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Jake found himself genuinely curious about another person. Not just attracted to someone's appearance, but fascinated by who they might be as a person. What did she think about? What made her smile? What kind of books did she read? What was her story? The presentation droned on, but Jake's Tuesday had already become something completely different from what he had expected when he woke up that morning. The meeting had been going on for about 40 minutes when something unexpected happened. The woman who had walked in late suddenly raised her hand. Jake felt his attention snap back to the front of the room like a rubber band. "Excuse me," she said in a clear, calm voice. "I have a question about what we just discussed." The presenter, Mr. Johnson from the marketing department, paused mid-sentence. He had been talking about their target audience for the past 15 minutes, showing chart after chart about demographics and buying patterns. Everyone in the room had that glazed-over look that comes from hearing the same information presented in slightly different ways. "Of course," Mr. Johnson said, though Jake could tell he looked a little annoyed at being interrupted. "I've been listening to all these statistics about who our customers are," she continued, "but I'm wondering if we're asking the right question. Instead of focusing on who they are, what if we asked why they should care about us in the first place?" The room went completely quiet. Jake could hear the air conditioning humming in the background and someone's pen clicking nervously at the other end of the table. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone says something that makes everyone else stop and actually think. Mr. Johnson blinked a few times, clearly not expecting this kind of response. "I'm sorry, could you explain what you mean?" Jake watched as she leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the table. She wasn't trying to show off or make anyone look stupid. Her tone was genuinely curious, like she was exploring an idea in real time. "Well, we have all this data about age groups, income levels, and shopping habits," she said. "But we're treating our customers like numbers on a spreadsheet. What if instead of trying to figure out how to reach them, we asked what value we're actually providing? What problem are we solving for them?" Jake felt something shift in his chest. He had sat through hundreds of these meetings over the years, and they always followed the same pattern. Someone would present data, everyone would nod politely, and then they'd implement the same strategies they'd always used. But this woman was asking a completely different kind of question. She continued, "I mean, think about it. When you decide to buy something, do you care about which demographic category you fit into? Or do you care about whether that product will actually make your life better somehow?" Mr. Johnson was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see him actually processing what she had said. Around the table, other people were starting to sit up straighter, like they were waking up from a long sleep. "That's actually a really interesting point," said Lisa from the creative team. "We spend so much time trying to target specific groups that we sometimes forget to ask whether we're offering them anything they actually want." Jake found himself nodding along, even though he wasn't usually the type to speak up in meetings. This woman had somehow transformed a boring presentation into an actual conversation about ideas that mattered. "Exactly," she replied, and Jake Noticed how her face lit up when someone understood what she was getting at. And here's the thing. When you focus on solving real problems for people, you don't have to work so hard to convince them to pay attention to you. They're already looking for what you're offering. Tom from the sales department jumped in. So, instead of trying to interrupt people with our message, we become something they're actively seeking out. Right, she said, smiling genuinely. It's the difference between being a door-to-door salesperson and being the store that people drive across town to visit. Jake was amazed at how she could take a complex business concept and explain it in a way that made perfect sense to everyone. She wasn't using fancy jargon or trying to impress anyone with big words. She was just sharing ideas that felt both simple and profound at the same time. Mr. Johnson had completely abandoned his prepared presentation by now. Okay, so if we applied this thinking to our current campaign, how would that change our approach? What happened next was unlike any meeting Jake had ever been part of. Instead of one person talking while everyone else pretended to listen, the room became alive with genuine discussion. People started building on each other's ideas, asking real questions and exploring possibilities they had never considered before. The woman didn't dominate the conversation. In fact, she spent more time listening than talking. But whenever someone got stuck or started going in circles, she would ask exactly the right question to help them think more clearly. She had this way of guiding the discussion without controlling it. Jake watched her carefully throughout all of this. She wasn't performing or trying to prove how smart she was. She seemed genuinely interested in helping everyone in the room come up with better solutions. When someone shared an idea, she would lean in and really listen, often responding with questions that helped that person develop their thought even further. At one point, even Jake found himself speaking up. What if we started by asking our existing customers why they chose us over our competitors, he suggested. Not in a survey, but in real conversations where we could actually understand their thinking. The woman turned to look at him, and for a moment their eyes met across the table. That's brilliant, she said, and Jake felt something warm spread through his chest. Because then you're learning from people who have already solved the problem you're trying to solve. The meeting ran 30 minutes over schedule, but nobody seemed to mind. When it finally ended, people were still talking in small groups, excited, about the new direction their project was taking. Jake had filled up 3 pages of his notepad with actual ideas instead of random doodles. As everyone started to file out of the conference room, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just about the project they had been discussing, but about his whole understanding of what a meeting could be, what work could be, what it felt like to be genuinely engaged with ideas that mattered. He packed up his things slowly, hoping to catch another glimpse of the woman who had somehow transformed their entire afternoon. But by the time he looked up, she was already gone, leaving only the lingering energy of possibilities that hadn't existed an hour before. Jake couldn't stop thinking about that meeting. For the next 3 days, he found himself replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. The way she had asked those questions, the way the entire room had come alive with ideas. It was like she had shown everyone a completely different way of thinking about their work. On Friday morning, Jake decided to take a different route to the office. Instead of going straight upstairs, he made a detour through the lobby coffee shop. He told himself he just wanted a change of scenery, but deep down he was hoping he might run into her. He didn't even know if she worked in the same building, or if she had just been visiting for that one meeting. The coffee shop was busier than usual, with a line of people waiting to order their morning drinks. Jake joined the queue, scanning the room casually. Small tables were scattered throughout the space, most of them occupied by people typing on laptops or scrolling through their phones while they drank their coffee. Then he saw her. She was sitting at a corner table by the window, completely absorbed in what she was doing. She had a laptop open in front of her, but she wasn't staring at the screen like most people did. Instead, she was writing in a notebook with one hand, while holding a paperback book open with the other. Her coffee cup sat forgotten beside her elbow. Jake's heart started beating a little faster. This was his chance to actually talk to her, maybe find out who she was and what she did. But as he got closer to the front of the line, he started second-guessing himself. What would he say? What if she didn't remember him from the meeting? What if she was too busy to be interrupted? By the time he ordered his coffee, Jake had talked himself out of approaching her table at least 3 times. He paid for his drink and was about to head upstairs to his office when curiosity got the better of him. He found himself walking toward her corner of the coffee shop. "Excuse me," he said when he was close enough that she could hear him without him having to raise his voice. "I don't want to bother you, but weren't you in the marketing meeting on Tuesday?" She looked up from her notebook, and Jake was struck again by how present she seemed. She wasn't annoyed at being interrupted or in a hurry to get back to what she was doing. She just gave him her full attention. "Yes, I was," she said with a genuine smile. "You work for the company, right? You made that great point about talking to existing customers." Jake was surprised and pleased that she remembered. "Yeah, that's me. I'm Jake, by the way." "Nice to meet you properly, Jake. I'm Alex." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you like to sit down? I was just taking a break from this project proposal." Jake didn't need to be asked twice. He sat down and glanced at what she had been working on. Her notebook was filled with neat handwriting, but it wasn't just notes. There were diagrams, arrows connecting different ideas, and what looked like questions written in the margins. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book she had been holding. "Oh, this," Alex said, holding up the book so he could see the cover. "It's about how people make decisions. I got curious about something after our meeting, and I wanted to understand the psychology behind why some ideas catch on while others don't." Jake was intrigued. Most people he knew would just Google something if they were curious about it, but Alex had actually gone out and found a book to read about it. "Find anything interesting?" "Actually, yes," she said, leaning forward slightly. "The author talks about how the best ideas aren't necessarily the most complex ones. They're the ones that help people see something familiar in a completely new way. Kind of like what happened in that meeting." They started talking, and before Jake knew it, 20 minutes had passed. Alex had this way of asking questions that made him think about things he had never considered before. She wanted to know what he liked about his job, what frustrated him, what he would change if he could. "You know what's funny?" Jake said at one point. "I've been working there for almost 4 years, and I don't think anyone has ever asked me those questions before." "Really?" Alex looked genuinely surprised. "But you obviously have good ideas. That suggestion about customer conversations could completely change how the company approaches marketing." Jake felt himself sitting up a little straighter. He wasn't used to people taking his ideas seriously, especially people who seemed as smart as Alex clearly was. "I don't know about that. I just thought it made sense to actually listen to people instead of making assumptions about them." "That's exactly my point," Alex said. "You're thinking about the human element, not just the business element. That's rare." They talked about the company, about the meeting, about what it was like to work in an environment where most people seem to be going through the motions. Alex told him she was a consultant who specialized in helping organizations think differently about problem solving. "I work with companies that are stuck," she explained. "Usually they have all the right data and all the right processes, but they're not getting the results they want. Most of the time, it's because they're asking the wrong questions." "Like, in our meeting," Jake said. "Exactly. Your company has tons of information about your customers, but you were using it to try to manipulate people into buying your products. What if instead you used that information to figure out how to actually help them?" Jake found himself sharing things he had never talked about at work before. How he sometimes felt like his job didn't really matter. How he wished he could work on projects that felt meaningful. How he had ideas but never felt comfortable sharing them in meetings. Alex listened without judgment, occasionally asking follow-up questions that helped him articulate thoughts he hadn't even realized he was having. "You know what I think?" she said after he had been talking for a while. "I think you're more creative and insightful than you give yourself credit for. You just need to find a way to use those qualities in your work." Jake looked at his watch and was shocked to discover they had been talking for over an hour. His coffee was long gone and people were starting to fill up the shop for the lunch rush. "I should probably get back upstairs," he said reluctantly. But this has been really great. I don't get to have conversations like this very often. Me, either, Alex said, and she seemed to mean it. Would you like to do this again sometime? I'm usually here around this time most mornings. Jake's heart did a little skip. I'd like that a lot. As he walked back to the elevator, Jake realized something had shifted in how he felt about his day. The same office, the same desk, the same computer screen were waiting for him upstairs. But somehow everything felt different now. He had spent an hour talking with someone who saw him as more than just another employee in another cubicle, someone who thought his ideas were worth discussing, his opinions worth hearing, someone who had shown him that work could be about solving real problems for real people, not just filling out reports and attending boring meetings. For the first time in years, Jake found himself actually looking forward to Monday morning. Not because his job had changed, but because he had started to see himself differently. And he had Alex to thank for that. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Alex started meeting regularly at the coffee shop. What had begun as a chance encounter became something Jake looked forward to more than anything else in his routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he would find Alex at her usual corner table, and they would talk for an hour before work. These conversations were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. With most people, he felt like he had to put on some kind of act, pretend to be more confident or successful than he really felt. But with Alex, he could just be himself. She had this way of listening that made him feel like his thoughts actually mattered. They talked about everything: work, books, movies, random observations about life. Alex had traveled to different countries for her consulting work, and she would tell him stories about the interesting people she had met and the problems she had helped solve. Jake found himself sharing dreams he had buried years ago, like his secret wish to write a novel someday. "What's stopping you?" Alex asked when he mentioned the writing thing. They were sitting in their usual spot, and the morning sun was streaming through the window behind her. Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Time, I guess. Energy. I get home from work, and I'm just tired. Plus, what if I'm not any good at it?" "What if you are good at it?" Alex countered gently. "What if you never find out because you're too afraid to try?" It was such a simple question, but it hit Jake like a punch to the chest. How many times had he talked himself out of doing something because he was scared of failing? How many opportunities had he missed because he convinced himself he wasn't good enough? "I used to think like that too," Alex continued. "I spent 3 years at a job that looked great on paper, but made me miserable every single day. I kept telling myself I should be grateful, that I was lucky to have such a good position. But I was dying inside." "What changed?" Jake asked. Alex smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "My dad got sick. Nothing too serious, but it was a wake-up call. I realized I was spending most of my waking hours doing something that didn't matter to me just because it seemed safe. And for what? So I could have a nice title on my business cards?" She paused to take a sip of her coffee. "That's when I decided to become a consultant. It was scary at first, not having a steady paycheck or knowing where my next project would come from. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living my life instead of just going through the motions." Jake had been wondering about Alex's story, about what had made her so different from everyone else he knew. Now he was starting to understand. She hadn't always been this confident, authentic person. She had made a choice to become who she really was, even when it was difficult. "The thing is," Alex said, leaning forward, "most people never give themselves permission to want what they actually want. They settle for what seems practical or what other people expect from them. But you only get one life, Jake. Why spend it pretending to be someone you're not?" Over the following weeks, their conversations became deeper and more honest. Jake found himself telling Alex things he had never told anyone, about how he sometimes felt invisible at work, like he could disappear and no one would notice, about how he worried that he was wasting his life in a job that didn't use any of his real talents. Alex never gave him advice directly. Instead, she would ask questions that helped him figure things out for himself. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? If money wasn't a factor, how would you spend your days? What did you dream about when you were a kid before you learned to be practical? One Thursday morning, about a month into their regular meetings, Alex looked different. There was something in her expression that Jake couldn't quite read. "I have something to tell you," she said after they had been talking for a while. "I got offered a big project. 6 months working with a company in Chicago. It's exactly the kind of opportunity I've been hoping for." Jake felt his stomach drop. "That's great," he said, trying to sound happy for her even though the thought of not seeing her anymore made him feel hollow inside. "The thing is," Alex continued, "it would mean relocating for half a year. I'd have to leave next month." They sat in silence for a moment. Jake stared down at his coffee cup, trying to process what she had just told him. Over the past month, these conversations with Alex had become the best part of his week. She had helped him see himself in a completely different way, had made him believe that maybe he was capable of more than he had thought. "I'm going to miss these talks," he said finally. "Me too," Alex said softly. "But Jake, I want you to promise me something. Don't let this be the end of asking yourself the hard questions. Don't go back to just accepting things the way they are because it's easier." Jake looked up at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, over the past month I've watched you come alive. You've started thinking about possibilities instead of just problems. You've remembered that you have dreams and opinions and ideas worth sharing. Don't lose that when I'm not here to remind you." She reached across the table and touched his hand, briefly. "You're not the same person who was sitting in that conference room a month ago, drawing circles on his notepad. You've remembered who you really are underneath all those layers of routine and self-doubt." Jake felt something shift inside his chest. Alex was right. He had changed over the past month. He had started speaking up more in meetings, sharing ideas, instead of just sitting quietly in the back. He had even started writing a little bit in the evenings, just random thoughts and observations, but it was something. "Promise me," Alex said again. "I promise," Jake said. And he meant it. When they said goodbye that morning, Jake knew it wasn't really goodbye forever. But he also knew that something was ending. The safety of having someone else believe in him, encourage him, ask him the right questions. From now on, he would have to do that for himself. Walking back to his office that day, Jake realized that Alex had given him something more valuable than friendship or encouragement. She had shown him what it looked like to live authentically, to make choices based on what mattered to him, rather than what seemed safe or expected. Now it was up to him to figure out what to do with that gift. 3 months after Alex left for Chicago, Jake was sitting at his desk on a Friday afternoon staring at a resignation letter he had just finished writing. His hands were shaking slightly as he held the paper, and his heart was beating so fast. He could hear it in his ears that after weeks of thinking, planning, and second-guessing himself, he had finally made the decision. He was going to quit his job and try freelance writing. It was terrifying and exciting and completely unlike anything he had ever done before. The past 3 months had been the most challenging of Jake's life. Without Alex there to encourage him and ask him the right questions, he had struggled to maintain the confidence and clarity he had felt during their conversations. There were days when he almost convinced himself to forget about his dreams and just settle back into his comfortable routine. But every time he was tempted to give up, he would remember something Alex had said about how most people never give themselves permission to want what they actually want. About how you only get one life and why spend it pretending to be someone you're not. So Jake had started taking small steps. He began writing every evening after work, even when he was tired and would rather watch TV. He started with simple things, blog posts about movies he liked, short stories about people he observed on his commute, articles about problems he noticed at work and how they might be solved. To his surprise, the writing came naturally. All those years of sitting quietly in meetings, observing and thinking, had given him plenty to say. He had opinions and insights he had never shared with anyone, and when he put them down on paper, they sounded good. They sounded like him. Jake also started networking, something that had always terrified him before. He reached out to people, on professional websites, attended industry events, and even pitched article ideas to online publications. Most of them said no, but a few said yes. He published his first paid article 2 months after Alex left, a piece about workplace communication for a business website. The check wasn't much, just $200, but Jake had never felt prouder of anything in his life. Someone had actually paid him for his thoughts and words. It was proof that maybe, just maybe, he could make this work. Still, quitting his regular job felt like jumping off a cliff. Jake had savings that could last him about 6 months if he was careful with his spending. After that, he would need to be making enough from writing to pay his rent and bills. It was a huge risk, and every practical part of his brain was screaming at him to stay safe. But as he sat there holding his resignation letter, Jake thought about the person he had been 4 months ago. That guy would never have considered leaving a steady job to chase a dream. That guy barely even knew he had dreams. Alex had helped him remember that there was more to life than just getting by, more to work than just collecting a paycheck. Jake folded the letter carefully and walked to his supervisor's office. His boss, Mr. Wilson, was typing something on his computer when Jake knocked on the open door. "Come in, Jake. What can I do for you?" Jake sat down in the chair across from Mr. Wilson's desk and took a deep breath. "I wanted to give you my 2 weeks' notice," he said, handing over the letter. Mr. Wilson looked surprised. "Really? Is there a problem? Are you not happy with your current projects?" "No, nothing like that," Jake said. "I've just decided to try something different. I'm going to freelance writing." "Writing?" Mr. Wilson seemed genuinely confused. "I didn't even know you were interested in writing." Jake almost laughed. He had been working for this company for 4 years, and his boss had no idea what he was passionate about. It just confirmed that he was making the right decision. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Jake finished up his current projects, trained his replacement, and said goodbye to his coworkers. A few people seemed surprised by his decision, but most just shrugged and wished him luck. It struck him how little impact his leaving seemed to have on anyone. He really had been invisible there. On his last day, Jake cleaned out his desk and packed up his few personal belongings. As he was getting ready to leave, he got an unexpected email. It was from Alex. "Hi, Jake," the email said. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know that my project here is finishing up next month and I'll be back in town. I'd love to catch up and hear what you've been up to. Are you still having those morning coffee conversations with yourself? Or have you found someone else to ask you hard questions? Hope to see you soon. Alex." Jake smiled as he read the message. He immediately wrote back, telling her about his decision to leave the company and try freelance writing. He told her about his first published article, about how scary and exciting it felt to be pursuing something he actually cared about. A month later, Jake was sitting in the same coffee shop where he and Alex used to meet, waiting for her to arrive. He was nervous, but in a good way. So much had changed since she left. He wanted to show her that he had kept his promise, that he hadn't let fear talk him out of pursuing what mattered to him. When Alex walked through the door, Jake stood up to wave at her. She smiled and walked over to his table, and for a moment it felt like no time had passed at all. "Look at you," she said as she sat down. "You look different. Happier." "I feel different," Jake admitted. "Scared half the time, but different." They talked for 2 hours just like old times. Jake told her about the clients he was working with, the articles he had published, the book idea he was developing. Alex told him about her project in Chicago, about the company she had helped transform, about the new opportunities that were opening up for her. "I have to tell you something," Jake said as their conversation was winding down. "That day you walked into our conference room and asked those questions, it changed everything for me. You probably don't realize it, but you completely changed my life." Alex looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't do anything special, Jake. I just asked questions." "That's exactly what was special about it," Jake said. "You helped me remember that I had a choice, that I didn't have to just accept things the way they were. You showed me what it looked like to live authentically, to make decisions based on what actually mattered to me." Alex smiled. "You know what's funny? You did the same thing for me." "What do you mean?" "Watching you discover your own Voice, seeing you get excited about ideas again. It reminded me why I love what I do. Sometimes when you're helping other people figure out their lives, you forget to pay attention to your own growth. Our conversations reminded me that transformation is always possible, no matter how stuck someone feels. As Jake walked home that afternoon, he thought about how strange life could be. 4 months ago, he had been going through the motions, living a life that felt safe, but empty. Then someone walked casually into a conference room and asked a simple question, and everything changed. He wasn't sure what would happen next. Freelance writing was unpredictable, and there would probably be difficult months ahead. But for the first time in years, Jake felt like he was actually living his life, instead of just surviving it. He was making choices based on who he really was, not who he thought he should be. And it had all started with someone who walked in casually but left him speechless. Not because of what she said, but because of who she was, and the person she helped him remember he could be.